The sun slowly sank into the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and orange. Each ray seemed to gently caress the distant hills, which rose like a hand-painted masterpiece. On the farm, the tranquil sound of the wind made the leaves of the trees whisper ancient stories, while the scent of damp earth and freshly cut hay filled the air. The scene resembled something out of a movie. Peaceful, untouched, where time seemed to slow down. At the entrance to the stable stood Apollo, a horse so imposing that at first glance he seemed to have stepped out of legend. His black coat gleamed under the last rays of the sun, as if polished by nature itself. His thick, wavy mane danced softly to the rhythm of the breeze, and his deep eyes, dark as the ocean at night, seemed to hold secrets known only to him. Apollo wasn't just beautiful. There was something about him that transcended his appearance. He observed the world with a calmness that concealed a sharp intelligence, as if he saw beyond what the eyes could perceive. Nearby, Eleanor walked across the property, a hammer in hand and a determined look on her face. At 25, she was the soul of the farm, running everything with dedication and courage. Her brown hair was tied in a braid that swayed with every step, reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. Despite the exhaustion that a day's work brought, there was a kindness in her eyes that illuminated everything around her. Eleanor was not just the owner of the farm, but also Apollo's guardian, and the bond between them was something anyone could notice. After nailing a board to a fence, Eleanor looked toward the stable and saw Apollo standing still, his gaze fixed on the nearby forest. It was as if he was listening to something no one else could hear. She smiled faintly, walked over to him, and ran her hand along his strong neck. "What is it, boy? I bet it's just a rabbit or a bird playing tricks on you," she said, laughing as she offered him a slice of apple. Apollo accepted it, but didn't take his eyes off the forest, as if something there had caught his attention. Eleanor knew Apollo better than anyone. He wasn't an ordinary horse. There was an almost magical connection between him and the world around him. At times, it seemed he sensed things that others couldn't even notice. And at that moment, even as night began to fall and the wind grew colder, there was something about Apollo's behavior that unsettled Eleanor. She stroked his mane once more before heading back home, unaware that everything would change that night. Everything seemed calm until a different sound caught her attention: Apollo's neigh. She stopped for a moment and looked toward the stable. Apollo stood still, ears pointed forward, his eyes fixed on the dense forest bordering the farm. There was something strange about his posture, something Eleanor wasn't used to seeing. He seemed tense, almost as if trying to decipher a sound or scent that was bothering him. The hammer in Eleanor's hand was momentarily forgotten. "What is it, boy?" she murmured to herself, already starting to walk toward him. When she reached him, she gently ran her hand along his neck, feeling his tense muscles. "Hey, calm down, Apollo. It's probably just some animal. Maybe a rabbit hopping around or a bird making noise." Her voice was soft, trying to soothe him, but Apollo didn't move. He kept his eyes fixed on the direction of the trees, as if expecting something to emerge at any moment. Eleanor took an apple from her apron pocket and held it out to him. "Here, boy. Come on, relax." Apollo accepted the apple and took a few bites, but unlike other times, he didn't seem distracted by the treat. He immediately turned back to the forest, his large, imposing body still on alert, nostrils flaring as he took deep breaths. Eleanor began to feel a slight unease. She knew Apollo too well to ignore that behavior. He wasn't the kind of horse to scare easily, and his usual calmness was something she had always admired. "What's bothering you?" she asked, more to herself than to him. The forest was quiet, and the wind carried no sound that she could detect. Even so, Apollo's behavior seemed to say that something wasn't right. Night had already begun to fall, and the air grew colder. Eleanor sighed, running her hand through Apollo's mane one last time before stepping away. "Come on, boy. Everything's fine. If it's something important, you'll let me know, won't you?" She tried to sound confident, but as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. As she headed back to the house, Apollo remained still, his gaze fixed on the forest. His ears twitched at every faint sound, his entire body still on high alert. It was as if he knew something deeper and more urgent was hidden in the silence. Night had fully settled over the farm, and the stillness was broken only by the soft sound of the wind and the occasional rustling of leaves. Eleanor's house was quiet. She had already gone to bed after a long day's work, while Apollo rested in the stable, lying on the soft straw. It seemed like a typical peaceful night like so many others, Yet somewhere in the darkness something unexpected was about to unfold. Even as he lay down, Apollo kept his ears constantly moving, attuned to the faintest sound. Suddenly he heard something that made him lift his head sharply. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible, but enough to grab his attention. A weak, distant cry coming from the direction of the forest. His nostrils flared as he took a deep breath, trying to discern more than just the sound. There was something about that cry that stirred him, something that awakened an instinct beyond comprehension. Without hesitation, Apollo rose to his feet. He didn't neigh or make any noise that might alert Eleanor. It was as if he knew this was a mission he had to undertake alone. His large, steady hooves moved softly over the ground as he left the stable, guided only by the distant sound that continued to echo through the night. Each step seemed careful yet resolute as he advanced toward the forest. The air grew colder as Apollo entered the trees. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy, but that didn't stop him. He moved with determination, weaving through branches and leaves as if he knew the path. The cry persisted, now slightly louder, guiding him like a beacon in the darkness. It was a fragile sound, full of despair, and it only made Apollo quicken his pace. After a few minutes, he reached a small clearing. The moonlight illuminated the area, revealing what he had been searching for. At the center of the clearing was an old cardboard box, worn and damp from the humidity. Apollo approached cautiously, lowering his head to inspect what was inside. There it was, a small child curled up among thin, tattered blankets, trembling from the cold. The cry was weak, but enough to show that there was still strength left. Apollo gently nudged the side of the box with his muzzle, as if checking to see if the baby was okay. He took a deep breath, exhaling warm air over the child in a gesture that seemed almost protective. The crying seemed to quiet for a moment, as if the baby could somehow sense it was safe now. The horse stood there for a few seconds, motionless, simply watching and ensuring the child was alive. But Apollo knew he couldn't stay still. He needed help and knew exactly whom to call. Lifting his head, he let out a loud neigh, a sound that echoed through the forest and reached the farm. It was an urgent call, unlike anything Eleanor had ever heard. As the sound pierced the night, Apollo turned back, ready to lead Eleanor to the spot. His mission had only just begun. The house was quiet, enveloped in the silence of the night, when the sharp neigh broke the air. Eleanor, already in bed, felt her heart race. It wasn't an ordinary sound, not a casual neigh. It was urgent, insistent, as if Apollo was trying to say something. She quickly got up, slipped on her boots, and grabbed a coat to ward off the cold. "What now?" she murmured as she picked up her flashlight. When she stepped outside, she saw Apollo in the yard, pacing back and forth, agitated. He turned his head toward her, his dark eyes seeming to plead for her to follow. "What is it, boy?" she asked as she approached. But before she could touch him, Apollo began walking toward the forest, glancing back every so often to ensure she was following. Eleanor gripped the flashlight tightly and followed the horse's lead, trying to keep up through the uneven terrain. The air felt colder within the forest, and the nighttime sounds of leaves and branches underfoot created a tense atmosphere. She didn't know what to expect, but something about Apollo's behavior told her it was important. He never acted like this without reason. After a few minutes, Apollo stopped in a small clearing. He snorted softly and looked toward something ahead. Eleanor shone her flashlight on the area and saw the cardboard box. For a moment, she didn't understand what she was looking at. It seemed impossible, surreal. Then she heard it, a weak, trembling cry coming from inside the box. "My God," she whispered, rushing to the box. She dropped to her knees, heart pounding, and shone the flashlight inside. There was a small baby curled up in thin, worn blankets. Its skin was pale, and its tiny hands trembled from the cold. The fragile cries seemed to be pleading for help. Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. "How could someone do this?" she said softly, her voice heavy with emotion as she carefully picked the baby up in her arms. The child was so cold that she instinctively wrapped it in her coat, trying to shield it from the wind. The baby opened its eyes for a moment, as if responding to the warmth now surrounding it, and let out a weak sigh before crying again. She looked at Apollo, who stood beside her, vigilant. "You're incredible, you know that?" she said to the horse, stroking his mane. He snorted softly, as if understanding that he had done something important. Eleanor pressed the baby close to her and stood up. "Come on, we need to get you warm. You can't stay like this for another minute." Apollo followed closely as she walked quickly back to the farmhouse, her heart heavy with worry. The baby's small body trembled, and Eleanor knew that every second mattered. "You're going to be okay," she murmured to the child, trying to comfort it. "I promise. Everything will be fine." When she reached the farmhouse, Eleanor hurried inside and began preparing everything she could: warmer blankets, a bottle of milk to heat up. As she worked, the baby slowly began to relax in her arms, its cries gradually softening. The warmth seemed to breathe life back into the little one, and Eleanor couldn't contain her relief when she saw the baby's cheeks take on a faint rosy hue. She looked at Apollo, who stood at the door like a guardian, and felt a wave of gratitude and admiration. "If it weren't for you," she said, her voice trembling. That night, as the baby finally slept safely, Eleanor knew her life had changed forever, and it was all because a special horse had heard Destiny's call and decided to act. The night felt endless for Eleanor. After carefully warming and feeding the baby, she finally saw it sleep soundly in a makeshift crib on the living room couch. Even so, her mind couldn't rest. How could someone abandon such a small, helpless child? As much as she wanted to believe everything was fine now, she knew she needed help to understand what had happened. With a heavy heart, Eleanor picked up the phone and dialed the number of Edward, the local sheriff and a longtime family friend. When he answered, his calm voice brought her a bit of relief. "Eleanor, is everything okay? You sound upset." "Edward, you need to come to the farm. It's serious. I found a baby, or rather Apollo found it. It was abandoned in the forest. I don't know what to do. This is way bigger than me." Her voice was shaky, and Edward didn't take long to grasp the urgency. "A baby? In the forest? I'm on my way, Eleanor. Stay calm and take care of it until I get there." A short while later, the lights of Edward's car lit up the path to Eleanor's house. The sheriff got out with determined steps, his hat already in hand, his expression serious. Eleanor met him at the door, holding the baby in her arms. "Here it is, Edward. It's so small. I can't understand how anyone could do this." Edward stepped inside and knelt to look at the child. He stayed silent for a few moments, observing the tiny, sleeping face before speaking. "This is serious, Eleanor. Very serious. Abandoning a baby like this is not only cruel but also dangerous. We need to find out who did this." He adjusted his hat and looked at Eleanor. "Can you show me where you found it?" "Of course, but it was Apollo who led me there. Without him, I never would have known there was anything in the forest." She glanced at the horse, who stood outside the window as if still guarding the night. Edward nodded, impressed. "That horse has always been special. Seems like he has an instinct for these things." With flashlight in hand, Eleanor and Edward retraced the path to the clearing. The area felt even colder and more somber under the moonlight. Edward examined the box where the baby had been found, noting drag marks on the ground nearby. "Looks like someone left this here in a hurry. The marks are still fresh." He knelt down and inspected the box carefully. There were scraps of torn fabric, possibly from the blankets wrapped around the baby, and a few stains that caught his concern. "I'll need to take this box back to the station. Maybe we can find a clue, fingerprints, anything that might tell us who did this." Eleanor shivered as she looked around the clearing. "But why here? Why abandon a baby in the middle of the forest so far from everything?" Edward sighed, standing up carefully. "I don't know, Eleanor, but this doesn't seem like a simple case of abandonment. Maybe whoever did this was trying to hide something. We'll find out, but you need to stay alert. If you notice anything unusual, let me know immediately." As they returned to the farm, Eleanor glanced at the baby in Edward's arms and felt a wave of concern. Even though the child was safe now, there were still so many unanswered questions. Why would someone do this? Were there more dangers nearby? And what else might that baby have faced if Apollo hadn't heard its cries that night? Back at the house, Edward made it clear that the investigation would be a priority. He promised to reinforce security around the farm and keep Eleanor informed of any developments. Before leaving, he placed a firm hand on her shoulder and said, "You did the right thing, Eleanor. Taking care of that baby might have saved its life. Now it's our responsibility to ensure it stays safe." Eleanor nodded, watching as Edward drove away. She knew her life would never be the same after that night. While the baby slept peacefully on the couch and Apollo remained vigilant outside, Eleanor felt deep in her heart that the little one had crossed her path for a greater purpose. And no matter how difficult it might be, she was ready to face whatever came next. The early morning hours were cold and silent, but something in the air felt heavy, as if the night still held secrets. Eleanor tried to rest on the couch, but sleep eluded her. The baby was safe, sleeping soundly in the makeshift crib, but her heart remained restless. She glanced out the window occasionally, and there was Apollo, standing still near the stable, his gaze fixed on the forest. It was as if he were waiting for something. Suddenly the horse began pacing back and forth, neighing softly but insistently. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. "Again, Apollo," she murmured, getting up, adjusting her coat and grabbing the flashlight. She walked to the door where Edward, still in the kitchen analyzing the box they had found, heard her footsteps and turned. "Eleanor, what is it?" he asked, noticing the worry on her face. "It's Apollo. He's agitated again. Something isn't right. Last time, he led us to the baby. I think we need to follow him again." Edward frowned but grabbed his flashlight and hat. "All right, but if he's right again, this might be bigger than we thought." They stepped outside together, and Apollo immediately began moving toward the forest, stopping occasionally to ensure they were following. Eleanor felt the same chill she had the previous night, but now the tension was even greater. Edward walked beside her in silence, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The crunch of their footsteps on the dirt and leaves was the only sound breaking the night stillness. When they reached a new clearing, Apollo stopped abruptly and snorted, lowering his head toward the ground. Edward shone his flashlight around the area, and they both noticed something unusual. On the damp soil were clear human footprints, some large, others small, as if two people had passed through recently. Farther ahead, a second box lay tipped over, empty, its lid partially open. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. "Edward, what is this? Another box? Who could have done this?" Edward crouched to inspect the box. It was dirt-stained with scratch marks on the inside, as if something, or someone, had tried to escape. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered, examining the details closely. "The footprints show someone was here. An adult, maybe carrying something, or someone." Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to steady the growing anxiety. "Do you think this is connected to the baby? Could there have been someone else? Another child?" Edward didn't respond immediately. He stood up slowly, adjusting his hat, and looked around the clearing. "I don't know, Eleanor, but this is serious, very serious. Whoever did this didn't want anyone to find these boxes. It's possible the baby you found wasn't the only one. And this second box, empty, could mean someone or something is still out there." Eleanor glanced at the dark forest around them, her chest tightening. The thought of another child, or perhaps something else alone in the darkness, was terrifying. Apollo, standing beside her, snorted again, as if trying to alert them to something more. "We need to head back to the farm," Edward finally said, breaking the silence. "I'll report this to the station immediately and request extra patrols in the area. We don't know who's behind this or why, but it's dangerous. And you need to stay alert, Eleanor. Let me know if anything unusual happens." As they walked back through the forest, Eleanor gripped the flashlight with trembling hands. The mystery surrounding the baby seemed to deepen with every passing moment. First, the discovery in the box, and now another clue pointing to something far more complex and unsettling. Apollo walked beside her, still on edge, as if aware the danger hadn't passed. When they returned to the farm, Eleanor looked at the baby still sleeping peacefully, but her mind was far from at ease. Who were these people? Why had they abandoned the child? And what else might be hidden in the forest? She knew the answers wouldn't come easily, but one thing was certain. Apollo had been right to lead them again. Something much larger was unfolding, and they were just beginning to uncover it. The night was far from over, and the feeling that something greater was behind these events kept Eleanor on edge. Even after returning to the farm, she couldn't relax. The baby slept deeply in the makeshift crib, but Apollo remained restless outside, pacing in circles and snorting softly, as if he sensed something else was about to happen. Suddenly, a sound pierced the silence. Not the soft cry of a baby, but something louder, more urgent. It was a sound that mixed a wail with a groan, coming from the direction of the forest. Eleanor's heart began to race. She glanced out the window and saw Apollo standing still again, his gaze locked on the darkness. Before she could think, Edward entered the room, his expression serious. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, already grabbing the flashlight. "It's different. It's not the baby. It sounds bigger, more urgent." Edward put on his hat and grabbed his own flashlight. "Let's check it out. We can't ignore this." Apollo was ready, waiting for them at the farm's entrance. This time he moved faster and more determined, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Eleanor and Edward followed, moving deeper into the trees, which seemed even darker and denser. The sound grew clearer as they advanced. A strange, uneven noise filled with desperation. They arrived at a clearing, and then they saw it. Among the shadows of the trees, something was moving. Edward raised his flashlight, and the beam revealed a small, thin, hunched figure. It was a child, but not like the baby Eleanor had found earlier. This child looked older, with dirty, tattered clothes, tangled hair, and wild eyes that gleamed in the light like those of a cornered animal. Eleanor held her breath. "It's another child," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The girl, realizing she was being watched, retreated into the darkness, letting out a low sound, a mix between a cry and a growl. Edward raised his hand, trying to calm her. "Easy, girl. We're not going to hurt you. It's okay." He lowered the flashlight slightly so the light wouldn't scare her as much. Apollo, standing beside Eleanor, took a step forward, lowering his head gently. The girl paused for a moment, staring at him. It was as if the horse had a special ability to convey safety because, little by little, she began to relax. Her eyes were still watchful, but her posture was no longer as defensive. Eleanor stepped forward and knelt on the ground to be at the girl's level. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you." Her voice was soft, almost like she was speaking to the baby. She slowly extended her hand, but the child hesitated, looking at Edward and then at Apollo, as if trying to decide whether she could trust them. Finally, the girl took a step forward, emerging from the shadows. Her appearance was heartbreaking. Pale and dirty skin, eyes filled with fear and something else, a deep sadness, as though she had faced far more than any child should. Eleanor's heart ached. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The girl didn't respond, simply looking at her with a mix of curiosity and mistrust. When they returned to the farmhouse, the girl saw the baby sleeping on the couch and immediately approached, observing closely but not touching. It was as if she recognized something familiar, as if she knew he was important. Eleanor and Edward exchanged glances. "Do you think they're connected?" Eleanor asked. "There's no way not to think that," Edward replied. "It's too much of a coincidence. Two abandoned children so close to one another. But what does it mean? Who would do something like this?" Eleanor looked at the two children, one sleeping peacefully and the other watching as if trying to protect him. "I don't know, Edward, but there's something bigger behind this, something we don't understand yet." As Apollo stood near the window, as though continuing to guard the night, Eleanor felt that her life had been changed forever. These children hadn't appeared in her life by chance. They were connected by a mysterious story, one she knew she would have to unravel, no matter how complicated it turned out to be. Morning dawned golden, with the sun illuminating the farm's fields and dissipating the mist still clinging to the ground. Eleanor stood on the porch, holding a mug of hot coffee as she watched the children through the window. The baby was still asleep in the makeshift crib, and the girl was sitting on the floor nearby, playing with a piece of hay that Apollo had pulled close to her, as if knowing she needed something to occupy her mind. Eleanor sighed, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past few hours. The children's presence on the farm wasn't just a mystery, it was a responsibility. Looking at the small, dirty face of the girl, who now seemed more at ease near Apollo, Eleanor realized these two lives were in her care. Somehow, she knew this was bigger than anything she had ever faced before. She stepped inside the house and knelt next to the girl, who looked at her with curious but cautious eyes. Eleanor slowly extended her hand, lightly touching the child's shoulder. "You're safe now," she said softly. "I promise no one will hurt you. I'll take care of you and your little brother." The girl didn't respond, but her expression softened slightly, and that was enough for Eleanor to know she was on the right path. Later, Edward returned to the farm to gather more clues and discuss the next steps. He found Eleanor in the yard, stroking Apollo as she watched the children play together near the stable. "You know this won't be easy, right?" Edward said as he approached. "Social services will want to get involved, and the investigation is just starting. There are so many unanswered questions." "I know," Eleanor replied, not taking her eyes off the children. "But until there's a solution, they need a home, someone to protect them. I can't leave them alone, Edward. They've been through so much already. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that right now, at this moment, my place is here, taking care of them." Edward nodded, respecting her decision. "You've got a big heart, Eleanor, but know that this will change your life forever." Eleanor smiled, though a single tear slid down her cheek. "My life has already changed, Edward, and somehow I feel like this is exactly what was meant to happen." Apollo, standing beside her, snorted softly and nodded his head, as if approving of her words. He seemed to understand everything, as though he had taken on the role of guardian for the children from the very first moment he found them. Whenever the baby cried or the girl showed signs of unease, Apollo was there, calm, strong, offering a reassuring presence. As the days went by, Eleanor began to realize that these children had given her life a new purpose. Before, her world revolved around the farm, the animals, and the daily work. Now, she had something far greater to care for, 2 lives that depended on her to feel safe and loved. Apollo became more than just a horse to Eleanor. He was a partner, a protector, a loyal friend. At night, he always stayed near the house window, keeping watch as if he knew something might still happen. During the day, he followed Eleanor and the children around the farm, never letting them stray too far. Eleanor knew it wouldn't be easy. Taking care of 2 such different children with such complicated stories would be a challenge. But deep in her heart, she felt she had been chosen for this. And with Apollo by her side, she was certain she could face anything. As the sun shone over the farm, Eleanor watched the children playing and Apollo watching over them with the same care she did. For the first time in a long while, she felt she was exactly where she needed to be. Her purpose was clear: to protect, love, and give these children a new chance at life. And in doing so, she had found a new reason to live. The sun was already high in the sky, casting a warm and welcoming light over every corner of the farm. It felt as if the darkness and mystery of the previous night were just distant memories. Eleanor, with an apron dusted in flour, was preparing something simple in the kitchen while listening to the timid laughter of the girl coming from the yard. That sound, so rare and delicate, brought a smile to her face. She looked out the window and saw the child playing with Apollo, who seemed to be enjoying himself just as much. The horse lowered his head and shook his mane as if trying to make the girl laugh even more. Beside them, the baby was safely nestled in a padded basket Eleanor had placed in the sunlight to enjoy the warmth of the morning. It was a scene straight out of a dream, simple but full of life. Eleanor wiped her hands and stepped outside into the yard, feeling the fresh scent of grass and the gentle warmth of the day. As she approached, the girl looked at her and for the first time ran to hug her. Surprised, Eleanor knelt down, returning the hug tightly. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" she asked softly. The girl didn't reply with words, but held her tighter, as if that gesture said everything. In that moment, Eleanor felt something shift inside her. All the fear, doubt, and exhaustion seemed to fade away. In their place was something new: strength. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, and that the answers to the children's mystery might not come quickly. But as she held the girl she had found alone and frightened in the forest, Eleanor understood her life would never be the same, and that this was exactly what she needed. Apollo approached slowly, as if wanting to join the moment. Eleanor smiled and stroked his head. "You knew, didn't you, boy? From the beginning you knew these children needed help, and I needed them just as much as they needed me." Throughout the day, the farm felt more alive than ever. The children, still shy, began exploring the yard, always with Apollo by their side, acting like a silent guardian. Eleanor, in turn, found herself full of energy, caring for them and the house with an enthusiasm she hadn't felt in years. Every small smile, every step of trust the children took, was a reminder that she was exactly where she needed to be. When night fell, bringing a gentle breeze with it, Eleanor sat on the porch, gazing at the stars that shone like tiny points of light in the dark sky. The children were inside the house, sleeping peacefully. Apollo, as always, was beside her, his strong and calm presence bringing comfort. Eleanor looked at him and spoke in a low voice. "I think we found our purpose, haven't we, boy? To take care of them, protect them. That's what we're meant to do." The horse snorted softly, as if agreeing with her words, and turned his gaze back to the darkness of the night, always vigilant. Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The hope that had been lost somewhere in the past was now back, shining as brightly as the stars above. What began as a frightening night filled with mystery and uncertainty had turned into a new beginning. Not just for the children, but for her as well. The farm, which had once been just a place of work and routine, was now a home, a space filled with love and renewal. And at that moment, Eleanor knew that despite the challenges that might come, she would never be alone again. The children, Apollo and she, formed a new family, brought together by fate and strengthened by love. And so the darkness of that night gave way to a light that would illuminate their lives forever. And so the story of Eleanor, Apollo, and the two children shows us how love, courage, and destiny can transform lives. A farm that was once just a place of work became a home filled with hope. A horse with a protective instinct revealed a truth we often forget: the strength of the bonds we create, even in the most unexpected circumstances. And a young woman who could have chosen to turn away from the unknown decided instead to open her heart and transform the lives of two abandoned children. If this story moved you and you felt its power, why not keep following inspiring tales like this one? Subscribe to the channel now and join this journey of stories that touch the heart. Leave a like. It helps more people find these moments that warm the soul. And don't forget to share with your friends. Everyone knows someone who could be inspired by a story like this. Oh, and to make sure you don't miss any updates, turn on the notification bell. That way, whenever an incredible new story is posted, you'll be the first to know. Thank you for being here and for being part of a community that believes in the power of hope and love. See you in the next story.